October 14th, 1951. 700,000 artillery shells, 250 tons of bombs dropped, all in just a few short weeks, and all over one small little area of Central Korea. That's what it took to finally win the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the battle for Heartbreak Ridge continued all week long, and the UN forces also launched a new operation in the West, Operation Commando. That operation continues, and the U.S. 1st Cavalry Division is still fighting the bulk of the enemy resistance. We saw a breakthrough in the northeast sector as last week ended, but the breach in the northeast had little immediate effect upon the Chinese defenders of the hills across the 5th Cavalry front, however, and the relentless hammering of artillery, mortar, and tank fire against the formidable bunker system failed to produce a breakthrough. Even airstrikes with napalm and 1,000-pound bombs made little impression upon the enemy defenders, since the Chinese had numerous escape routes that negated most of the effects of the air attacks. The dogged enemy defense, in many cases to the last man, took a heavy toll on 1st Cavalry Division's forces. On the 11th, the Chinese still refused to give ground, but the punishment they've been taking has depleted their manpower and ammunition supply. The night of the 12th, they abandoned Hill 272, which opens the way to the linchpin of their defense system, Hill 346. So there are new operational plans afoot, which I'll go over next week, when I imagine the assault will be continued. As for the 1st Commonwealth Division's part of the operation, last week they had taken most, but not all, of Maryang-San, and the week ended with them fighting back repeated vicious Chinese counterattacks. Their resolution proved decisive. At dawn, the attacks ceased, and when in the afternoon an Australian patrol cautiously entered the Chinese positions, it was to find them abandoned, together with heaps of stores and weapons. On the tumbled ground in front of the Australian positions lay the mangled remains of hundreds of Chinese. Under a flag of truce, the Chinese were permitted to remove any of their men who might yet be alive. Taking the ground and holding it are two different things, though. The King's Own Scottish borderers relieve the Australians, the 8th, and build defenses, but they're under pretty continuous Chinese mortar fire, even on supposedly safe reverse slopes. The first actual counterattack in the area is on the 12th, southwest of Little Gibraltar, though the enemy is beaten back after taking heavy losses. But the warning is clear. This is not a safe place to be. Well, what place in Korea is safe? Certainly not the Heartbreak Ridge area where that bloody battle comes to its end. 3rd Battalion U.S. 9th Infantry pushes on from Hill 867 northwest towards Hill 960. 1st Battalion hits Hill 666, which doesn't have some satanic nickname for some reason. On the 8th, both hills fall. A bayonet charge by the latter takes Hill 1005 the 10th. West of 9th Infantry, ROK, South Korean 8th Division, takes Hill 1050 and part of the Kim Il-sung Ridge on the 11th. As for the preparations for the attack on Hill 851, the final objective on Heartbreak Ridge itself. On the 10th, Robert Love's 2nd Engineering Combat Battalion finally finishes making the road along the Mundung-Ni Valley usable for medium tanks, and the Shermans of the 72nd Tank Battalion, fitted with new high-velocity 76mm cannons, begin to rumble up the valley. They do this, by happy coincidence for them, just as elements of North Korean 5th Corps, which is disintegrating, are being relieved by the 204th Division from the Chinese 68th Army. So the North Koreans have left positions the Chinese have not yet arrived and dug into. And the tank thrust and the general U.S. 2nd Division advance, continuing from last week, finds a lot of them in the open. The tanks race to and through Mundung-Ni town, taking losses, sure, since every available gun is turned on them, but causing heavy losses among the Chinese and cutting off the supply route to the western side of Heartbreak Ridge. At intervals of about 100 yards, the tanks, operating without infantry in the northern reaches of the valley, were able to cover each other and fire at targets of opportunity. They disrupted the enemy relief completely and made the task of the infantry much lighter in the days that followed. It was apparent the enemy had thought that tanks could not be used in Mundung-Ni Valley, and the feat of Love's engineers in opening a road had taken him by surprise. But this doesn't mean that the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge is over. Let's look at U.S. 38th Regiment's advance. 3rd Battalion takes Hill 605. 2nd Battalion tries and fails to take Hill 905 on the 10th, succeeds the 11th, as 1st Battalion takes Hill 900 that same day. On the 12th, 1st Battalion advances towards the Kim Il-sung Ridge, taking Hill 974. The regiment's final objective is Hill 1220. Spoiler, it falls tomorrow the 15th. On the ridge at Hill 851, the last objective on the actual Heartbreak Ridge itself, the KPA, North Korean, 23rd Regiment from 13th Division is defending, backed by 21st and 19th Regiments. 21st to the rear, 19th to the east, defending the valley there. U.S. 23rd Regiment is still attacking them. Now, on the 10th, 2nd Battalion swings down from the ridge to take Hill 520, just south of Mundung-ni town. This hill is at the end of a spur that runs east-west up to Hill 851. The 11th and 12th, the 1st and the French battalions advance on 851 bunker by bunker. So on the 13th, with 2nd now hitting the hill also from the west up the spur, the French storm the peak. And after 30 days of bloody and bitter fighting, the 23rd Infantry holds Heartbreak Ridge, and it looks like it's for good. The casualties are alarmingly high on both sides. U.S. 2nd Division has taken 3,700 since September 13th, with 23rd Regiment and the French Battalion accounting for half of that. Estimates of enemy losses reach 25,000, even 35,000 according to T.R. Fehrenbach, and half of that during Operation Touchdown, which began last week on the 5th. High casualties here go pretty much hand in hand with the massive increase in ammunition expended. Walter Hermes lists the support the infantry got in artillery. 76mm guns, 62,000 rounds. 105mm howitzers, 401,000 rounds. 155mm howitzers, 84,000 rounds. The mortar crews used over 119,000 rounds, and the recoilless rifles 18,000. Of course, there were millions of rounds of small arms fired too. To keep up the rates of fire during the battle, supplies were airlifted in, and 5th Air Force dropped 250 tons of bombs on the enemy in 842 sorties over Heartbreak Ridge. You have to hit the deep bunkers with a direct hit to do any damage, but still. Here's a look at the battle, well, at both of the last battles in this region. There were many points of similarity between the Heartbreak Ridge struggle and its immediate predecessor, Bloody Ridge. In both cases, the North Koreans had organized strong defensive positions in depth and had had the advantage of defilated routes to bring in logistical support and reinforcements. The UNC forces had to advance over exposed routes, which the enemy artillery and mortar fire covered very effectively. The 2nd Division advance was extremely hazardous and slow, as long as the North Koreans were allowed to concentrate their fire on relatively few targets. This is all true, but in both battles, the enemy's will to fight back, his determination and fighting capability, were underestimated. Both these battles were supposed to be little operations just to straighten out the lines, so they didn't have enough reserves to consolidate objectives taken or reinforce. Heck, at Heartbreak Ridge, 10th Corps Commander Clovis Byers did not allow 38th Regiment to be used until Operation Touchdown last week, but it was pretty obvious several weeks ago that 23rd Regiment on its own could not take the whole ridge. The two battles also have in common command changes. Tom DeShazo took over 2nd Division during Bloody Ridge, and Robert Young took over from him during Heartbreak Ridge. They were both successful with their inherited operations, but only after a huge expansion of the original plans. And they only won once they started hitting the enemy hard at multiple points and not just one. So once the enemy couldn't reinforce all the threatened positions or concentrate artillery fire on one small area, then yeah, he had to withdraw to his next defense line. But to get him out of those bunkers, it really had to be done with infantry weapons up close. This sort of hints that future fighting will be equally bloody and against an enemy equally determined. Atop Heartbreak Ridge, the men of the 23rd Infantry could see 10 miles to the north. They could see mile after mile of dark hills growing gradually higher, hills in which lurked hundreds of thousands more Chinese and North Koreans. It was a long way to the Yalu, and these men knew in their hearts They were not going there, no matter how many hills they took. But 10th Corps has won the day and has removed the sag in the lines held by U.S. 2nd and ROK 8th Divisions. An advance of around 8 kilometers has brought 10th Corps lines into phase with 9th Corps to the west. But speaking of U.S. 9th Corps, there's another operation in action this week. 9th Corps has one attacking towards Kum Song. 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet visits 9th Corps Commander William Hogue the 9th and finds everyone at Corps headquarters eager to carry out some limited advances to improve defenses, keep up the pressure on the enemy. The only downside might be that if they are successful, then the SAG and 10th Corps lines, just fixed, will be replaced by a bulge in 9th Corps lines. U.S. 24th, ROK 2nd, and ROK 6th Divisions are to advance to about 6 kilometers south of Kum Song, the Americans flanked by the South Koreans on each side. They move out the 13th and advance like half the planned total distance that first day. They push ahead more slowly today, but are still advancing as the week ends. There's even more action this week, more of a skirmish than a battle, when elements of the PVA, Chinese, 141st Division take on the Belgian Volunteer Corps, aka the Belgium-Luxembourg Battalion. The latter arrives at Hak Tang Ni, a north-south ridge like 6 kilometers in front of the UN lines, on the 10th and digs in. They only have 560 men, instead of the 900 they usually have, since they're right in the middle of troop rotation and the new guys have not arrived yet. They come under fire that night from Chinese artillery, and on the 12th, the Chinese make a few small assaults, which are repulsed. The main attack begins just before midnight against the heavy weapons company holding the southern peak. The fight lasts for a few hours, but all Chinese attacks are beaten back. U.S. 3rd Division Commander Robert Soule orders the Belgians back to the main UN lines, which is a timely thing because after they withdraw, they get to see a heavy artillery barrage fall on their former positions. So that's the war this week. But what about the peace? There is actually some progress on resuming peace talks this week. While last week the communist side rejected once again UN proposals to move the talks from Kaesong, where they were held in July and August, in negotiations this week, both sides agree that any further talks will be held in Panmunjom. So on the 11th, the UN team dismantles its former peace camp. The New York Times reports that same day. After suspending the truce negotiations for 7 weeks on trumped-up grounds, the communists have now agreed to resume the talks at a new site and under new neutrality controls. It might be a little unfortunate that they call them trumped-up grounds, for on the 12th comes another incident. The communists claim that a UN plane has strafed the ground around the Kaesong neutral zone, killing a child and wounding another one. A preliminary investigation by UN liaison officers cannot determine whether or not the charges are true. And I bet we have not heard the end of that. But that is the end of this week. Heartbreak Ridge coming to its depressing conclusion. And Operation Commando still in action with new plans afoot to win the day. And a new site chosen, maybe, for more peace talks should they begin again. One of the battalions on Heartbreak in its battalion history has this to say after Heartbreak Ridge. The heart to fight, though not gone, was not the bright light it had once been. 11 days from now, on October 25th, the men who took Heartbreak Ridge will come down off the hill, replaced by men of U.S. 7th Division. I will quote Fehrenbach to end today. The real heartbreak lay not in their dead and maimed, some of whom the men of 7th Division found still wedged in bunkers and crevasses, but in what had been accomplished by it all. Yeah, to what end? Well, watch the story continue to unfold right here, week after week. Right now on our World War II channel, we have another story unfolding too, a North African chronicle, so don't miss that. And to make sure we can continue to do this and to do that, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned officers, and Bill Thornillo, I think that's how you say it, hope so, he's the Time Ghost Army member of the week. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.
Oh, thank God. Thank you. No blessings from
No,
you.
sorry,
so
I was coming up with the perfect blessing.
What is wrong with you?
What is wrong with you?
I was coming up with the perfect blessing. Wait.
I think
Here it is.
the fame
You say,
got to your head.
Zarathustra himself pours down his bounty upon you, and you will have good fortune all of your days. Wow. Thank you, Zarathustra. Well, Anna used to thank Zarathustra.
Thank you.
Good old Zarathustra, huh? I didn't know you were listening these days. I thought you stopped listening like 3,000 years ago.
Always listening, always watching.
Always.
Mm.